Welcome to Under the Fig Tree podcast. In today's episode, hosts Reverend Micah Glenn and Reverend Dr. Ben Haupt talk theology and life as they meditate under the fig tree.
What's up? Welcome back to another episode of Under the Fig Tree podcast. I'm your host, Reverend Micah Glenn, Director of Recruitment here at Concordia Seminary in St. Louis, joined by my co-host, Mrs. Kati Gaschler.
See, you act like you're going to say something crazy or different every time, and you don't.
Because I pause and I think.
Because you can't remember my name?
No, because I'm instinctually and habitually, I want to say Reverend Dr. Benjamin Haupt.
Yeah. I'm not that person.
You're not that person.
No. Maybe for Halloween.
I would, yeah. Let's reserve that. We have a guest on the podcast today, as usual. I'm going to say Reverend Kyle Mietzner, but you're also a chaplain, and I should have read the bio that you sent us. I did read it, but I didn't memorize your current rank in the military.
I'm a captain.
So Reverend Kyle Mietzner, Reverend Kyle Mietzner, chaplain and captain.
Correct.
In the U.S.
Army.
Welcome to the podcast.
Yes, thank you.
It could have been a little cleaner, but
So I was elected as the district vice president for Alaska.
right.
And my Anglican friends tell me that I can always go by right reverend too then.
Because you're a chaplain, or just because you're
Because I'd been elected to
the
some
vice
sort
president.
of like episcopacy.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. Let me ask you this, because I don't know if I know how do you introduce yourself? Like with all now, you're not the right reverend aside, but
It's tough.
reverend title, which one is which, and is it like compartmentalized?
So in the Army, it's actually really easy. Chaplains are the only soldiers who are not referred to by rank.
Got
So
it.
every chaplain, whether they're a 2-star general or a second lieutenant, top or bottom, we're just chaplain.
Got it.
And the idea behind that is that, so in the British Army military, chaplains don't hold rank. The idea is that they are the same rank as whoever they're talking to.
Got it.
So in my head, that's how it actually works.
Sure.
I know that's not actually how it is, but I want to be able to take care of brand new privates as
Right.
well as like super high ranking people, and so it's just chaplain.
Awesome.
Nice.
Well, thank you for your service. I'm a military brat, and so a high affinity toward, but also deep respect for everybody who serves, but especially brothers in Christ that are chaplains of the military. Such a needed thing to provide spiritual care, especially in challenging and trying times of all sorts of different reasons. But you're also like, again, you're a chaplain, you're a soldier, but you're also an alum of this institution.
Correct. I graduated from here in 2010.
Right. And so, again, having read your bio, you're graduated from Concordia, Chicago. Go Cougars. RF.
He said River Forest.
He did.
I did, yeah.
But so because we're old. And so I I graduated high school in 2002 as well, which is when I'm assuming you graduated high school.
Well, I'm special. It took me 5 years to graduate from Concordia River Forest. So I graduated high school in 2001.
That's all right.
Yeah.
But so I almost went to RF when it was still RF, when I graduated high school. So did you know Andrew Termenstein?
Yes. Yeah.
A Luther North classmate of mine. So I was like, oh, we almost could have been Concordia Chicago classmates too. But I was a little slower than you.
I was the last graduating class from River Forest, and they changed it like the second we walked out the door.
Interesting.
So
Okay. There you go. Bang, bang. You're the second or third CUC grad recently. Abby Reynolds went to CUC, right? I'm just going to pretend like she did.
Someone did, and I think it was her.
She should have.
Well, she should have. She
Exactly.
didn't.
She went to the right, Concordia. Well, welcome to the podcast. How's life going?
Life is awesome. I honestly, I kind of feel like I'm having too much fun, and they're paying me to do it.
There you go.
And it's like, most of the time I feel like I'm on top of the world.
Sure.
And it's great. We're in town for the LCMS Ministry to the Armed Forces Conference, and I got to preach in chapel the other day on Tuesday, and I was like frightened, right? Because here's the men who have like taught me to do this, and 14 years later, they're going to see like, well, how things have fermented over the years.
Exactly.
But it was great. My old professors, Dr. Peter was like sitting there halfway in the pews, and he was just like so engaged, and it was so encouraging. It was just great. I was like, this is the most fun I've ever had.
Yeah.
And in general, I kind of feel like that most of the time, that things just keep getting better and better, and like having more and more fun.
That's awesome. Yeah, preaching in chapel, that's why I tell people, it's not that it's just like the context and like who else is preaching that pulpit. It's that when you get up there and you preach, like people are actually listening to you, and not like listening to you, but like listening to you. And like you say, yeah, these are the guys that taught me how to preach, and so
they're all. It's a very different environment than preaching in a congregation, because all these people are trained to do it, and they have ears that hear everything very differently. Yes. And the comments that I got after chapel were very different than like after church.
It's like when you made this move.
Yes. Yes. I was like,
yeah.
I know like what sermon structure I used, even though I don't. That's not how I do it. But
yeah,
it was great. It was a blast, and to have everyone come up and have actual like constructive comments was really interesting. I talked to your father-in-law for an hour afterwards.
He'll do that to you
about it. It was just fantastic. I'd never met the man before.
Sure. Oh no, Jonathan he's one of those people who genuinely can just go up to a stranger and have a conversation. Like he's known him for 10 years. It's very impressive.
Yeah.
And he'll like pick if you've preached, it gives him an in way. But like it'll be interesting. We'll be like, if they're here for a seminary event, I'll see him staring at somebody, and then he'll be like, "Oh, I noticed you were wearing this," and then like launch into conversation. It's very impressive.
Huh.
Yeah,
he's got like a British accent, and so you're just like you're in it once it happens.
Just sucks you in.
He's too polite to be like rude and be like, I don't want to talk to you, and walk away. So you're just there.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's all right though. Well, Kyle, tell us a little bit about yourself, about your life, and
I grew up all the way back. I was born to two LCMS teachers.
Okay.
They lived in a parsonage on the side of a church in Wyandotte, Michigan. And
where is it?
Yeah, so it's like right downriver of Detroit.
Got it.
Okay.
Yep.
So yeah. Sometimes if I'm feeling spicy, I tell people that I was born in Detroit.
There you go. There you go.
And it's like
just gauge the reaction.
If you look at the map, it looks like Detroit.
For sure.
But it's actually Wyandotte, so so my parents are both Lutheran school teachers, and my first home was a parsonage, and it's very poetic now, of course. But my dad eventually ended up working for AAL, so we ended up in Wisconsin. I grew up in Appleton, Wisconsin, really. Went to Concordia, Chicago for all the youngsters, and went to seminary in St. Louis. So, and then since then, I've been kind of all over the country, but I've never spent much time in the Midwest.
Yeah.
And it's been wonderful. My vicarage was in New Orleans.
Nice.
I had a unique vicarage. I didn't have a whole lot of supervision. My wife was doing her deaconess internship at the same time, and we were kind of just like unleashed upon the city of New Orleans.
Sure.
Post Katrina, and so it's looking back on it, it's like completely surreal, because the city was a wasteland. And it was being run by interns, basically. Huh. So I ended up working with and like sort of supervising some interns from Harvard's Kennedy School of Governance.
Okay.
I don't even really know how this happened.
Yeah.
But the woman who's the mayor of New Orleans now, we worked very closely together, and it was just like these kind of weird, exciting things that I think only happen to people working in the church.
Sure.
And then my first congregation was a Grace Lutheran in Greensboro, North Carolina.
All right.
So I was there for 5 years, and it was wonderful. We bought a house right across the street from the church. We bought a house for $26,000.
Stop. That's ridiculous.
That is crazy. Okay.
Right? 1,700 square feet.
Was that just like genuinely the market? I mean, this is like post like housing bubble, right? Maybe.
It was in a bad neighborhood.
There we go.
Yes.
All right, there we go.
The church. Yeah, I mean, it was fine.
Sure.
That's the thing about bad neighborhoods, right? Is that like you can say that all day long, but there's actual people that live
Not
there.
only I tell because I'm from North County, and it's changed a lot since when I was a kid. But I'm like, even now, and even when I was growing up, bad stuff tends to happen to people who are looking for bad stuff. Sure, accidents happen every once in a while, and you read about that in the news, but that's the anomaly. It's not the everyday. Yeah.
If it was like really that bad, it would be some like bombed out crater.
Of course. And you're a pastor, and even in bad neighborhoods, there's some level of respect for the most part for church workers, in my experience.
Yep.
Yes, that is true. And yeah, we had a beautiful life there, and it was very good. Then I went to Anchorage, Alaska. I was the pastor at Zion Lutheran Church there for 7 years.
Okay.
And I was just down the street from Joint Army and Air Force Base. And yeah, so 7 years there. My wife is from Alaska, and so we were close to family. And it was great. I had never done any like outside stuff really all that much.
Sure.
But
what else are you gonna do in Anchorage?
Yeah, once you're like boots on the ground in Anchorage, like all of a sudden you're like, oh, now I am hunting, and now I'm climbing mountains and stuff. So, it was fantastic. And then, do we want to talk about like why I became a pastor, and then like why I became a chaplain yet?
Yeah.
So yeah, we will. And this is like one of those clear-cut cases of like you're a pastor and you're running the show. You're used to running the show. But let's pause for a moment, and I'll get a handle on things. Just a couple of quick follow-up questions, because before we get too far away from kind of your life story. So you mentioned your wife. Can you share her name, please, if you don't mind?
She does have a name. Her name is Ellie.
Ellie Mietzner.
Yes.
Deaconess.
Ellie Mietzner, yes.
Oh. I feel like I know Ellie.
She was at your house a couple of weeks ago.
And because I do know, sorry, let me cut this Dale. Cut it, Dale. I do know Ellie. I just didn't know her last name. And now that you're saying that, because
that's what happened with Abby.
It is. Well, because again, so Dorothy, of course, Dorothy is on the executive committee, but she's also been very involved with the Concordia Deaconess Conference. And when I can, I join her for their conference. And I was like, again, so I have a pretty good knowledge of who's who. Not like who's who, but like I've met several deaconesses. And I remember, I'm like going through, I was like, okay, a deaconess that might be around my age that lives in Alaska. And as soon as you said Ellie, I was like, trying to put two and two together. I guess I've never asked Ellie her last name. Sorry, Kyle, I've never asked her about you either. Sorry. But cool. Yeah, no, Ellie's great.
Yes.
Yeah, she's incredible. She's really cool. I like Ellie.
No, she's fantastic.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, so you guys met at Concordia, Chicago, so she's also a CUC grad? Or?
Nope.
Right.
She graduated from the University of Oregon.
Right. We should have Ellie on, because she's got a story.
She does.
Anyway. Yeah. But it's not my story. But anyway, sorry.
Oh, yeah. She has a fantastic story.
Yep.
She spent a lot of time. She went all over the world doing various things with good things.
Yeah.
But she was in like Slovakia and England, Guatemala. It's kind of, when people hear it, it sounds very difficult to understand. But then finally, eventually, someone at the IC was like, you could like do this for your life, and you could go be a deaconess, and that could just be like your job.
Right.
And so, and that's how we met. We met in Greek class.
Oh, sure.
Yes. So she was the only female in our class. There was like 45 men back in those days in our Greek class. And then my lovely wife, and we sat next to each other. And
that's how it happens.
Fate sealed it.
That is how it
Greek.
happened. Yeah, she had to leave early once a week to go to a deaconess class, because deaconesses aren't required to take Greek.
Right. Yep.
But since my wife loves Jesus and the Bible, she wanted to learn Greek.
Sure.
And so I would go over and help her with the things that she missed during the last 15 minutes of class. And next thing you know, a year
Great
later,
move.
we're married. Yes. So, yeah, that's probably like some textbook form of how the girl in Greek class gets married to a seminarian.
Well, guys, they usually either are too scared to try anything, or they think they got to be over the top. And for some girls,
They
you might need to.
overcomplicate
But
it.
usually, if you just
Help her with
share your
homework.
notes for the last 15 minutes of Greek class, it's a pretty good way to get to know somebody.
I was also over the top, yes.
Okay. All right. Well, then.
Yeah.
At least you're self-aware about it. So.
Exactly. There you go. Do both. Yeah.
I would like, this is the days before cell phones. And I contacted her by throwing my shoe at her window.
Great.
That's
Good.
awesome, actually.
Yeah.
That's not over the top at all. That's just cool.
Olden days.
Yep.
Gather around, children, and let me tell you how it used to be.
Exactly.
So yeah, we met in Greek class. We were married a year later here at the chapel in St. Louis. It's a very special place for us. Our whole entire courtship or whatever was spent in the second to front row in chapel. We went to chapel every day, and it was just fantastic.
Would you share a hymnal? Because I hear that's how you know.
Yeah, so I think that's cute, and I admire people that do that. I don't know what to do with my hands
Sure.
in that situation.
Can I be honest with you? Dorothy, I don't know if it's a chivalry thing to her or what, but she refuses to hold a hymnal when she's sitting next to me.
Oh yeah, I don't.
I
don't hold a hymnal when I'm next to Paul.
But do you understand how uncomfortable it is to make it to where you can read it, hold it there, especially in a long hymn, and also
It's a sacrifice
for
for love.
There we go.
You got to bear that cross.
Yeah.
That is.
Mm-hmm.
I'll just continue to hold her hymnal for her forever.
Good.
I mean, I vowed to, but yeah. Anyway.
But then, I was ordained and
Yeah.
haven't sat next to my wife in church for
Then
the
it'd
last 14
be
years.
weird if you would share hymnal now, probably somehow. I don't know.
They might have something to say, but
Yeah.
also maybe not. I don't know. Depends on where you are.
It makes sense if you're holding babies and stuff like that too. But she also has most of the hymnal memorized, and so she doesn't really need it. But
Sure.
but again, what are you gonna do with these hands?
Ricky Bobby, man. That's it, man. I see. This is it's one of those things where sometimes, it's just our little Lutheran bubble. You become a church worker, and it's actually, again, just because usually at Concordia Deaconess conferences there might be one or two husbands there, but usually it's just the ladies. But yeah, being able to meet another deaconess husband as opposed to a pastor's wife, it's awesome. A joy.
What about us, huh?
What about us?
You hear about the
Exactly.
pastors' wives all the time.
but never the deaconess.
Yeah,
husbands.
you guys need retreats. Deaconess husbands retreats.
Me and Kyle are on it. I actually, if you schedule one for Alaska, I might be there, depending on the time of the year.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's awesome. Great stuff.
We also have 3 children. So
There we go.
we have 3
Yes.
daughters, and they're 14, 12, and 8 right now.
14, 12, and 8. Yeah, everybody's family dynamics are different, but you're at a different level than we are right now. We are slowly getting there, and I can see the writing on the wall.
So
We have 2 boys and 1 girl.
high school, middle school, and
So
Elementary?
7th grade, 6th grade, and 2nd grade.
oh, okay.
Yeah, they're all in the same school right now. They go to a lovely Catholic school in New York where we live, and It's called Augustinian Academy.
Look at that.
Nice.
Yeah. And I was like, well, it's a little OG Luther stuff. And
So are you stationed in New York?
Yes, I'm stationed in New York now.
Got it. Okay. For some reason, I still had you in Alaska, but
we pretend that we still live there.
You know, I've never been, but Dorothy and I are on the hunt for the Northern Lights. So sooner than later.
That is bucket list stuff.
We thought we had it one year. Well, when we were I did Westwood House, and so we went to Loch Ness, and before Dorothy booked it, she was like, do the Northern Lights show there in the winter, and they're like, yeah, it'll happen. But what they didn't say, it happens every once in a while. And on the flight, they were showing in the Shetland Islands, but that's still further north, so we didn't see any.
I've seen them from the air. Yeah. I don't want to like dash your hopes, but I've seen the Northern Lights, and honestly, I was kind of like, all right, now what?
I'm just gonna ignore that you said that and keep it on the bucket list.
It's cool. It's a pretty crazy. It's kind of like the eclipse.
Sure.
You're like, all right.
Yeah.
Now what?
But see,
That's how I feel.
But let me throw a curveball your way, because if Dorothy had it her way, we'd be like in one of those glass ceiling homes, like small hotel rooms surrounded by snow, and I've spent an exorbitant amount of money for the two of us to be there for 2 days.
Like a caribou skin blanket.
Exactly.
Perfect.
And so you add that around, and actually it sounds pretty okay to me.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. It's cool.
Right. I'm just messing with you.
You should definitely go do that, and I don't know if that exists up there, but
no, this is like Finland or something like that. So we'll go I'm sure if Dorothy has it her way, we'll see it multiple times throughout our lives. But yeah, with the other stuff.
Yes. Nice. My wife is also Finnish and knows Finnish.
What?
I don't. Okay. I mean, I've talked to Ellie before.
She has to come on here. Yeah.
Why did we ask you to be?
Yeah, no offense.
We should have asked
sounds
Ellie.
More exciting.
You should have emailed us and be like, "Hey, I'm going to be around. Can you have Ellie on?" No, I'm just messing with you.
I know. This morning she was like, "I'm gonna stay here and I'm not gonna go." And I was like,
"Oh, if she'd have come, she'd be sitting right next to you. She'd have been on for sure." We'd be like, "No, come on and join us." Yep. Yeah, that'd have been cool. Well, thank you for sharing that. And you said those things, and before we got to the meat of the podcast, I just wanted to follow up on a couple of those things, because I mean, your life story is from start to here is really cool, and I for one, I appreciate it. I know our listeners will. Katie, any follow up before we?
No, I think all my questions have to do with like the chaplaincy and all that.
Yeah. Perfect. Well then,
I would say one thing is that I aspire to live like the goal-free lifestyle, because so far my life has been a billion times more interesting and fascinating than I would have thought it would be.
Sure.
Because like it was like going from Wisconsin to St. Louis was like the other side of the world or something. And instead, like God has actually gifted me with something that I could have never seen coming, and again is like way more exciting than I ever could have thought it would be.
So again, from childhood, I was born in Hawaii. My dad was a Marine when I was a kid. I lived in Beaufort, South Carolina. Not quite Hawaii, but it's different. And then we moved back to Hawaii before we moved to St. Louis. And then I've grown up here, but lived in England. I've been to the Maldives, been on Loch Ness, and just these opportunities to travel and see the world. I mean, the world that God created is remarkable, and your hometown is great.
It is.
But there's so much more than it. And I always encourage young people. It's like when you get to college, when I talk to high schools, like if your college has a travel abroad for a semester thing, I was like, more times than not, it's just like your school has an agreement to where you just pay tuition. It won't be expensive. So just go and do it. It's half a year.
Yeah. I did that in Australia.
See?
Nice.
It was great.
But same thing, like career-wise, if you'd have told me to plot my career as a pastor, I couldn't have imagined what my career has been. And then I think about the future, because like, what else does God have in store? It's such a remarkable thing to where you go and you're going to be a servant for the church. And so, like, again, you have it in your mind. It's just what your pastor did growing up. And there's absolutely nothing wrong because your pastor will have a different perspective of how that's played out. But you never know. You could be in Alaska one time, New York the next minute, and all over the world. It can be remarkably, and it is incredibly fun.
Well, I like how you said you live goal-free.
Yeah.
And I love that because I think sometimes we feel like we have to make these goals.
Yes.
Like, I'm going to do this and this and this. And to not do that, we just seem lazy or something. But actually, it's freeing to have, not that you shouldn't have like motivations or aspirations or things like that, but I don't know. There's just tons of ways to be successful, whatever you define that as. And
Bernard of Clairvaux says this thing that God will always give you what you ask for or something better.
Ooh.
And so far, that has proven to be like absolutely spot on for my life because, again, it's like you got to have like some day-to-day goals, right?
Yeah.
So far,
Wake
I've
up.
just done the next thing, and it's like pretty cool
Yeah.
because God's not going to do anything that's wrong for you.
mm-hmm.
But so my home church in Appleton, Wisconsin, the pastor that confirmed me is still the pastor there. And, but I bet you could go and ask him the same thing. And he would still say, my life has been far more interesting and fun and fascinating than I thought it could be, even staying in the same place too.
Yep. The goal, I can't, well, Katie knows me. Dorothy is our future planner. I am very much a live in the moment type of person. And it's not that I don't do things that I've been told to do, save for retirement, all these other things, but like tomorrow is tomorrow. Today is today. And so, yeah, I'm very much in the moment person, but so just for listeners as well.
It's okay. Jesus is too. He talks about this a lot.
Indeed. So even small town, because I've been blessed. I travel. I've talked about out of the country. I've also been blessed to travel to places in the country, places I never would have heard of, places like Wausau, Wisconsin. And at first you're like, what's in Wausau?
Rib Mountain.
Go check it out. Wausau is remarkably beautiful. Any town that has like a little city next to a river immediately, and maybe it's like a St. Louis thing, but immediately becomes remarkable. You don't need to have a river.
Oh, like Fort Wayne.
But if you do, yeah, Fort Wayne, one of my favorite places in all of the world. I keep saying it. It's on the record.
I'm from Fort Wayne.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And I joke around.
There's no river there?
There's
is.
3.
Yeah.
Oh, there's
There
three.
are 3
Even
rivers.
better.
Yeah.
The real 3 river city is Pittsburgh. Anyway.
I don't know.
I just mess around with people. Ben Haupt is also from Fort Wayne. Fort Wayne's fine. There's
Fort Wayne,
hear,
fine.
I hear there's
Trademark
another
that.
seminary in Fort Wayne.
I'm not sure.
Somebody should go explore at some point.
Yeah. My husband went there.
I was actually just there for a conference as well, and my counterpart, Reverend Matt Wheatfield, we're great friends, and we absolutely enjoy working together. We just anyway, we
Classmate
should
of
have
mine.
Matt. Oh yeah, from Concordia, Chicago, right?
Yep.
Yeah, we should have. I should check with Matt to see the next time he's in St. Louis. We should have him on the podcast.
Do you know Matthew Frick then?
Yes.
That's funny. Shout out to Matthew Frick. He was near us in Indy. Anyway.
It's got a cool last name.
Shout
if
out
he's
to
ever
Matt Frick.
Matt, if you're ever in town, email Katie. We'll have you on the podcast. But right now we're with Kyle. So Kyle, before we let my ADHD continue to take us into everything,
Orbit.
exactly.
Yes.
For our listeners, because this is kind of the heart and meat of the podcast, and feel free to answer it any way you want. But if you don't mind, please share with us your story of what led you to become a pastor, and then how all of this has played out for you in your life.
Right. So I grew up in the church. I grew up in an LCMS congregation. We were super active. It was a really big church. It was the 10th largest Missouri Synod church, which is like quite the humble brag.
For sure.
Right. But I always had a great relationship with my pastors, with my DCEs. We had multiple DCEs on staff, and it was a great place to grow up. And I always had like some inclination towards being a church worker. I wanted to be a DCE because I was a teenager,
Right.
and that seems like what you want to do when you're a teenager. I went to eventually. I decided I wanted to be a Lutheran history teacher. Still wanted to like work in the church. For some reason, I don't know if I can articulate why I wanted to do that, but there was something there that was like pushing me in that direction. Eventually, I ended up in between my 4th and 5th years in college. I went and worked at a camp in Idaho at Camp Perkins.
Perkins?
Yes.
Shout out Signy. If she's ever in St. Louis, we'll have her on the podcast as well.
Yeah, Signy White was my boss there, I guess.
Signy, we've begun to partner with Naloma, and now Signy is becoming a very dear friend of mine.
Yeah, so I spent that summer, and it was the first time that I had ever really like seriously, personally engaged the scriptures on a like daily, intentional basis. And so I was teaching the Bible to all these kids every day,
Right.
and eventually I was just kind of like, oh well, I could just do that. Like that could be my job. So I called back to Concordia, and I called a man named Harry Thurwanger, and I said, hey, how do I become a pastor? And there was a lot more to it than I even knew.
Right.
And so I rolled into the pre-sim program my 5th year in college, and that's how I came to do this and love this. I did feel that internal call that everyone talks about, right?
Yep.
And then they're just like, oh, well, then you go to seminary. I'm like, okay. So I just did the next thing, went to seminary, and 4 years later, I come out with a deaconess wife, a child, and in a congregation, and so yeah, I don't think there's no like one standard path towards the ministry, right?
No, that's exactly why we asked that question.
Yeah.
And mine was kind of all over the place, but I had always had good feelings about the church, and I loved it, and couldn't ever totally articulate why that was, right? But
Yeah.
it was just a place I always wanted to be. I remember one of my friends and I got in trouble because we rode our bikes to the early service when we were having a sleepover, and like did not tell his parents that we had gone to do this.
Imagine getting in trouble for going to church.
Yeah.
I don't mean like trouble, but it was a little it was a little boy Jesus in the temple,
Sure.
They're like, hey, what are you doing? You got to tell us, right?
Right. Well, even just the value of that. I, as you're saying this, and I talk about how I became a pastor and things like that, but I was leading a devotion just yesterday and just talking about the world and all these other things. And for whatever, being now that I'm a parent, being a parent is hard, and being a Marine parent was something that I don't necessarily want to experience. But to the point to like when people ask me about becoming a pastor, like, yeah, there were these people who influenced me, but growing up, no matter how hard life was, my parents took me to church every Sunday, even on the Sundays I did not want to go. And sometimes it was lawful. But that intentionality and even when things were hard, and life was difficult, there are several moments in my life where my mom would say, read scripture or have something ready for me. And just the value of your parents were teachers, but again, even if you're a teacher, that doesn't have to be a part of your kids' lives. And to just do that and make church something joyful that you desire, that you want to share with other people.
When we were in Wisconsin, my mother taught in a public school.
Oh, there you go. Okay.
So they were not church workers for most of my upbringing.
Yeah.
But yeah, it was, yeah, that's the thing, right? I don't even remember not wanting to go. It was just, this is what we did.
I was also, I had my moments as a kid. I was about to call myself a bad kid. I don't think I was a bad kid, but sometimes I could be.
we were all bad children.
Yeah.
At some point.
Yeah.
The heart is like evil. Yeah. Who can understand it?
We're sinners.
Oh, look at that. Yeah. But no, I like that's such a huge thing, and and parents, like, yeah, take your kids to church. And it seems like it doesn't make sense really all the time.
Right.
And sometimes you're sitting there, and I've watched my wife for 14 years now sitting in the pew with our children, and like she had like really a lot of little kids for a long time, and I was like, it appeared to be, I mean, she managed it gracefully, but what a struggle. It'd be easier to stay home, but yeah, it's a beautiful thing you can give your kids. And so when I went to River Forest, to Concordia, Chicago, I like didn't go to church for about 3 years.
Sure.
It's
easy not to in college.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
It's really easy.
And I was not antagonistic towards the faith, but I didn't care about it.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
But then there's this beautiful thing that when something, when I wanted to come back, like the church was still there for me. Like, John Nunes was my pastor in college. The kind of like, it was just going back to church and hearing the preaching of the word and receiving the sacraments was just this beautiful thing. And it was like, oh, it's there for you. Yeah. And I haven't been gone since. And yeah.
Well, Kyle, let me break into the story a little bit, because at what point then did you decide to become a chaplain? Like I said, I'm a military brat. On my vicarage, I was in Huntsville, Alabama, next to Redstone Arsenal, and seeing soldiers around. I was talking to recruiters. I've always thought about it. It's not that I've stopped having the conversation with it, but talking to Dorothy, she's like, I don't want to be married to a military chaplain. And I said, it could be like this. I'd be a captain when I started. I'm like, Dorothy, my dad was enlisted. I grew up enlisted. You live in officer housing if we lived on base. And she said, I don't want that. And I said, okay, that's fair. More than fair. So at what point did chaplaincy become a thing?
So I first heard about this when I was in college. I think a retired chaplain came to talk to us, mm-hmm. and that's the first time that they talked to me about it. Like 16 years or so before I actually ended up like looking into it for real.
Right.
So, and that's the thing, right? Whether it's like just planting the seeds with people being pastors or whatever it is, these things like sometimes take a lot of time. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And these poor recruiters are out there with like quotas that they have to get people in now. And I want to tell these poor people, like, it took over a decade and a half to get me in. So I don't know who gets credit for that.
Sure.
But what these poor people, the recruiting crisis is like, look, it takes a long time. But and then people who are pastors know this, but they continually send you mail. Mm-hmm. They're like, have you thought about being a chaplain?
Yep.
And but the big change came when I moved to Anchorage, and my church had all these soldiers and airmen at it all the time, and almost every single one of them said, "Oh, you should go be a chaplain. You should try to be a chaplain." And eventually, I listened to them. It seemed like a cool thing to do. I tried to get into the reserves first, and then both the Army and our Missouri Synod Ministry to the Armed Forces folks emphasized the need for active duty chaplains to me, and I was kind of like, let's do it. Like, why do something halfway? Let's try it out. And I had a lot of misconceptions about the chaplaincy before I started looking into it, because everyone thinks that once you join the chaplaincy, your Missouri Synod card goes out the window, because everyone thinks you're going to go in there and you're going to start doing all this like weird, like woke stuff or whatever,
right?
Mm-hmm.
And it's absolutely not true. Mm-hmm. The Army wants me to be a Missouri Synod pastor.
Right. They need you to be.
They do. And it's actually required.
Yep.
So, like they cannot make you do things that go against your ordination vows.
Right.
And so in the chaplaincy, we provide or perform religious support for everyone. So I do the things that I can do,
Right.
and if I can't do them, then I find someone else to do them.
Yeah.
So if I have Jewish soldiers who need a place to celebrate Purim, I don't go lead that for them, and that would be a dishonest thing to do, right?
Of course.
But instead, I tell them like, oh, well, here's where the rabbi chaplain is, like, and I help them find ways to do that, and it's being a chaplain is just this fascinating thing where I think that we have such a good handle on it because we understand the two kingdoms.
Yeah.
So kingdom of the left, kingdom of the right. I'm an American. I'm also a Christian who happens to be Lutheran in the Missouri Synod. And these things are not at odds with each other, but they both exist at the same time. So I'm there to protect the religious freedom of every single soldier in my battalion. I have 750 soldiers that I'm the chaplain for.
Yeah.
And that's like the base unit of the Army, and that's like the lowest level of chaplaincy. We're embedded with them. I do everything they do. I don't carry a weapon, which is fantastic.
Get a personal bodyguard.
Yes. So he's called a religious affairs specialist.
Right.
But yes, like the position is there because we don't carry weapons, and so we have a guy who does.
Yep.
But yeah, it's a fascinating world where you get to help all these 750 soldiers, and so we do have mental health professionals in the Army, but they're not embedded with the units, and there's not as many of them as there are chaplains, but the government since its inception, Chaplain Corps was founded in 1775. George Washington was like, we need these guys there.
Right.
And so they put us alongside soldiers on the battlefields, on the front lines since the very beginning, because the government recognizes that these soldiers need what we call religious support,
And the most horrifying thing that man can do to each other.
Yeah. Because war is horrifying, and it's unfortunate, and but we're there. So here's the deal too: is that my personal feelings about whatever mission or engagement we have aren't really relevant.
Yeah.
I'm not the one carrying out the mission. I'm the one there supporting the people who are carrying it out with whatever sort of fallout or trauma or celebration that they have for that. It's a really beautiful ministry, and I didn't really know what I was signing up for when I started, and I didn't know that we were still like deploying overseas. I didn't know. It was like
that's why Dorothy doesn't want me to do it. That reason alone. Yeah.
Yeah. If you join the Army, they will send you.
Exactly. They'll say, well, not guaranteed. You're going to get deployed. My dad was a Marine for 20 years. You're getting deployed at some point.
I deployed 10 days after signing into my unit.
Yep.
Yeah.
Sounds about right.
And I wanted to.
Of course. Yeah. It's part of the program. Yeah, exactly. But and so talking to Dorothy, she was like, well, do you think they'd really be able to not get deployed? I'm like, again, Dorothy, I was like, my dad was a Marine for 20 years. If I become a chaplain in any branch, there will be a period of time where I'm deployed, regardless of wishes or anything. You have to, as part of the, again, it's necessary.
And that you do have to have a supportive family structure.
Yes.
It can be a very stressful thing. It's harder for the families at home than it is for the deployed people.
Thank you for saying that. That is the case.
Yeah. Deployment's easy.
Sure.
You're just over there, and there's like zero boundaries.
Right.
You're just on all the time, and it's easy in that regard. You have just one single focus. You're not balancing your home life and your work life. There's no balance.
Sure. And again, let me just it can be hard, especially during wartime. I'm not saying
That is hard.
Yes, exactly. That is, again, I mean, I like I said, I grew up on a military base, and I tell people, I share this story during the first Desert Storm because my dad was a Marine, first in, and he actually didn't go to Kuwait, but, you know, they deploy to other places to be ready to respond. And just one day, dads are there, and next day, it's moms and kids on the entire military base.
Yeah.
And you just go about your life.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that is, we live on base, and that is kind of a wonderful thing about being on base with everyone else too.
Living at CSL is kind of like it. There aren't armed guards at gates, but yeah.
Yeah. When I came on to, I keep wanting to call this base. It's the campus, right?
It feels very familiar.
It kind of does. But I was like, oh, they just let you drive on here? I don't have to show anyone my ID.
Yeah, exactly.
But not in the buildings.
And then I tried to walk into this building. I was like, oh, there it is.
Yeah.
Yes. But yeah, it's a challenging thing for families at home. So everyone does like need to be on board with it.
Sure.
And in my family, it was something we're all in on it. And so they tell you what we were told, like, drink the Kool-Aid. And like, I actively look for the Kool-Aid to drink. Yes, give me more.
Right.
Let's do it. But yeah, it's super challenging, but things that are worth doing are super challenging.
Yep.
Right. And that's why you want to do this stuff too, because you do have that pastoral heart. You're not doing this for a paycheck. There's other things you can do, I think.
I've shared this story. I was looking at Indeed, not for myself one day, but anyway. And so I got my undergraduate degree in chemistry, and there was a lab job, entry-level lab job, no experience needed, just need a bachelor's degree in chemistry, and the starting salary was $95,000. So if only I was motivated by money, I'd be sitting in a lab looking at water droplets right now. But anyway,
Well,
this is better. I'd rather do this than that.
yeah. And my advice too for people who are thinking about the ministry is, like, if you can do something else, do it. Like, only do this if you can't.
Sure. Yeah.
Because like, it's wonderful, but like, if you're not internally driven to do this, like, go do something else. Not everyone has to be a pastor.
No, and we need great lay people. We need great lay people who are passionate about Scripture. But yeah, it is a very sacrificial job, no matter what your context is going to be, to where you just have this known understanding that there are rhythms in life that everybody else experiences that just isn't for you. Like, I mean, that's the LCMS initiative, set apart to serve. That set apart part of it is going to be the case for every church worker.
Say goodbye to your weekends.
Yep.
Before I was ordained, my biggest fear was I watched the show Lost, and it was on Wednesday nights. I knew, like, Wednesday night is church night. We got Bible study Wednesday nights. I'm not going to be able to watch Lost anymore.
The days before streaming.
Yeah, I know. And then, like, Lost turned out to, like, not be good anyways at the end.
Yeah, really well.
Those
went
first
downhill
couple
there.
seasons, though, it was so cool.
Yeah.
It got real weird, though. Anytime a show starts regular and starts time travel, I'm like, oh, here we go. Anyway.
But that's you can devote yourself to vanity of vanities, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, whatever it is you're concerned about losing out on, like, what you get back, I think has been way more for me, at least. So when I joined the Army, I actually thought I was gonna get out of the Sunday morning thing for a little while.
Yeah.
And I was kind of looking forward to, like, just going to church and sitting in the pews with my family. The closest church to us is a 90-minute drive.
That's fun.
So me and the other LCMS chaplain were like, clearly, we just start our own here.
Oh, sure.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So back in the pulpit every week. It's awesome.
Sure.
We have a small congregation there. And this is why LCMS pastors should also seriously consider doing this, because we have LCMS soldiers all over the world, and you want them to have a pastor. Mm-hmm. And so it's a wonderful thing. I get to provide this service every week for soldiers they're like, well, we've never seen this before. I say, yes, it says on the bulletin, Lutheran Church Missouri Synod. And they're like, is that for real? I say, yes, it is. And they're so happy to have it.
Of course.
It doesn't happen a whole lot because there's not a whole ton of us.
Yep.
But it's a wonderful thing to be able to provide in whatever context you're in. So, yeah. But again, I thought I was getting out of the pulpit, and the Lord of the church was like, actually,
Right.
You've been ordained to do pretty much one thing.
Yeah.
and
you're going to do it.
Here's your altar. Here's your pulpit. Get to work.
Yep.
And people show up every week.
That's awesome.
It's beautiful.
Well, that kind of ties into one of my questions. I really don't know anything about chaplaincy or military, to be honest. So for a chaplain, is there a norm, the standard chaplain, day to day, if they're not deployed, what do they do? Is that what it looks like? Or just answer all my questions that I have known nothing about.
Day to day. So 6:30, you report for PT, for exercise, and it takes various forms. Sometimes we run, sometimes we lift things, and a lot of that. So 6:30 every morning, which was one of the reasons why I was hesitating to sign on the dotted line. That's a commitment. We were talking about your husband's 6 a.m. Bible study. And
that's only once a week.
Still, that's commitment.
Yeah.
And I salute you, sir. That is a lot. But yeah, 6:30 every day. You roll in. You do various things. I run a lot. And then let's see. You go home. You shower. So then you come back at 9 o'clock. And usually there's some sort of meeting, some sort of sync with all the other people on staff. And then there's a lot of meetings. They're very different than church meetings, because church meetings are mostly run by volunteers. And these meetings are all run by professionals. And the tempo is very high. There's a lot going on all the time. And so you're always preparing for the next mission. There's always some other training mission that's coming up. And so you're always having to figure out, how do we get all of this stuff from this place to this place? And then how do we get these people from this place to this place? And a lot of times it's helicopters, which is awesome.
Yep.
Yeah. If you want to go on helicopters, join the Army. It's super cool. So they're planning all this stuff, and then you come back after lunch, and for the chaplain, I don't know anything about the operational side of things. I'm just there to take care of all these people. I try to understand as much of it as I can, but then I usually have a lot of people that are coming to talk to me about various issues. So last calendar year, I did 683 individual counseling sessions. So you have to keep track of them and report them. We're the only people in the Army with complete privilege or confidentiality, which to us as pastors, it's not hard to understand, right? We take a vow not to divulge anything confessed to us.
Right.
And so it's the same thing in the Army. All the chaplains are not allowed to we can't tattle on people. Mm-hmm. We're the only people in the Army that they can talk to, and it's a completely safe space. And which is great, because if they have something that they're actually struggling with, if they go to talk to someone else, there's this fear about what might happen. But they come talk to me, we can figure it out.
Right.
Sometimes. I'm a pastor at the end of the day, you know.
Right.
But we can talk about stuff without having any fear. And again, that's a beautiful thing that the federal government has seen, that this is something that every soldier needs. There's some ratio of like soldiers to chaplain. I think it is like for every 700 soldiers, there has to be one chaplain. Which it can be hard to remember everyone's names.
Sure.
But we all wear name tags.
Yeah.
Very helpful. But and so there's always a bunch of like running tasks too. There's like events that you're planning. We do a lot of like retreats, and those take a lot of planning. Just figuring out what you're going to teach, where it's going to be. But yeah, it's just you're coming alongside all these other people doing these things that you're not necessarily involved with, but understanding where they're at with all of these things, and then being there for them and with them, so that like when it does come to the darkest days of our lives together, they have someone that they trust and can lean on for all sorts of struggles. And so yeah, it is doing the like mundane day-to-day things with people. It just, we all learn to trust each other. And like you've never seen trust like you've seen in an infantry battalion. You've never seen trust until you've seen a bunch of soldiers with machine guns all working together. It's an incredible thing to behold.
Yeah.
And no one gets hurt because they all know what they're doing and they all trust each other. And I try to stay out of the way in those things, which happens most of the time.
Sure. No, it's, again, growing up on a military base, when I was talking about I'm a day-to-day person, like I grew up in the structure, and you have those movies where like all the cars turn right at the same time and all this. It's not quite that perfect, but it is well put together. It has to be, because again, when I imagine, again, only from growing up in it, when people start shooting bullets at you and launching missiles at you, in order to be effective in return, you got to do it together.
Yeah.
You got to be focused, and you practice those things so it becomes instinct. But again, for us as kids, like you were talking about helicopters, we'd see a helicopter with soldiers dangling from a line, and they'd fly out to the ocean, and then the helicopter would fly back, and the guys wouldn't be on the line.
Where'd they go?
Well, they got dropped in the ocean, and they got to make it back to shore because they're Marines. And so it's just exactly. And again, my dad was a soldier. And again, we went to church and things like that, but Monday to Friday, he was an air winger, and so he was a plane mechanic. But when you're a plane mechanic, you're fixing planes so that in warfare you can fix the planes, but after you fix the plane, you pick up your gun and you fight. And it sounds movie-like when you just describe it to people, but it's, again, without these men doing this for a living, literally, the freedom that you enjoy doesn't exist.
Right. The freedoms that we have and the things that we like to debate and fight about here, we can only do because there are people out there on the front lines actually defending that. And to defend the vocation of soldier, too. Like, as a non-combatant, I'm super comfortable in my place with that. But it is a thing that a lot of people have had questions about, right? Because Luther writes this thing, right? Luther writes a document called Whether Soldiers Too May Be Saved.
Right.
What's the question behind that? Like, can you be a soldier and still be saved? And the answer is absolutely, of course.
Right.
There's a misuse of military strength. There's a misuse of these things. But I had this revelation when I got to my church in Anchorage, and I hadn't spent a whole lot of time around people in the military. And all of a sudden I realized, it's like, oh, okay, these guys who put on the uniform and actually do make sacrifices, they're not out there fighting for some abstract concept of freedom or liberty. They're actually doing this in service of their neighbors.
Yeah.
Like they're loving their neighbors, and that's like that's what your country is. Your country is not an idea or a concept. Your country is made up of human beings that God loves, and you do kind of have to be on the side of thinking that we're doing good, righteous things around the world, that we are protecting people, that there is evil out there, and that this is how the Lord is actually punishing evil and bringing justice to this world. And I think for the most part, we get it right.
It's not infallible.
No.
And it was never meant to be. But again, like without it, not even just our military, but any form of defense is just chaos.
Yeah.
And nobody wants to live in that world at all.
No. And so, yeah, we have like great appreciation for the love that these people have for their neighbors, for their families, for their countrymen.
Yeah.
And here's the deal too, is like in the New Testament, I didn't really see this until I joined the Army. Like there's soldiers everywhere. Mm-hmm. They pop up all over the place. And all of a sudden you're like, oh, well, like there is a battalion of soldiers in the Passion narrative, and I'd never seen it before. And I'm like, I know how many people that is now.
Yep.
It's like a couple hundred people. This is amazing. But not once do they ever say like, hey, soldiers, put down the sword and stop it.
No, there's a day when those swords will be beaten into other tools, but we're still waiting for that day to come.
Yeah. Yes, but it will come.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
The swords will be beaten into plowshares. But these soldiers come to John the Baptist and they say, "Hey, what should we do?"
Right.
And John the Baptist does not say, "Go AWOL and run away." This is like, don't extort people. Don't be cruel to them. Be content with your wages. And so it is a valid vocation that we're there to support. And again, like thankful for. So it all over the place.
Yep.
If you have eyes to see that, it's there.
And it's not like a regret, but again, so my dad retired. The only regret is we were living in Kaneohe, Hawaii, and we moved to St. Louis. I love St. Louis, but just in all honesty, Hawaii is so much better than St. Louis, and it's not even comparable. But
St. Louis looks really nice this time of year.
Everything's blooming. I love St. Louis. I regard it my hometown now. When people used to ask me where I was from, for a lot of my life, I would say Hawaii, not St. Louis. But now when they ask me where I'm from, I say St. Louis. I love this place. But it's not Hawaii. But again, it wasn't that we were just living in Hawaii. We lived on the military base. And again, even in Hawaii, going off the base, life looked, sounded, smelled. It was all different. And then when we moved from military housing to the house my parents bought in Ferguson, I was just like, oh, this is different. And as my dad was retiring, he was like, going on and about like, where we're moving, all the 20 years I was serving was for those people to protect their way of life. And even as an 11-year-old, when you get out into the civilian world and you're looking around, it's like, okay, for 5 years of my life, almost, I didn't see my dad, and this is what he was protecting. And I don't say that facetiously, but it is a wake-up call. And all that to say is that's who I am here today. I wasn't the soldier, my dad was. And so then when I regard the soldiers, they're doing what they're doing so we can sit here and record a podcast for work.
Oh, yeah.
What a blessing. And what a blessing to have somebody who's willing to do that for me in this world so we can live our lives safely, relatively speaking. The world still happens in the United States, but yeah.
Mm-hmm. And I think, you think about the places in the world that are just like awful, and there's still people there, right?
Yep.
And that's why, like, it's we're all over the place, you know.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, after World War II,
We have military bases everywhere.
yeah,
We are ready to respond to the world if should
yeah.
it ever happen. Anyway,
We-
I'm a fan of our military.
I mean, we had the Marshall Plan. We rebuilt Europe,
Yep.
and then I think we kept going from there. And yeah, it's I don't know. And again, it's all super complicated. I don't understand all the ins and outs of it, but you're like, we have people there, and what are they doing there?
We have there are U.S. soldiers all over the world. How many foreign soldiers on U.S. soil? None is the answer.
None.
There are no foreign military bases on
There are.
America.
We do have foreign soldiers.
Soldiers, but
who
not
do
like
serve with us.
but not foreign military bases that are equipped to respond to America. That's what I was
yeah.
getting at. But
And-
anyway,
And again, though, in the chaplaincy, it doesn't really matter what you think about whether or not this particular mission is good or bad, because you're still there for the people that are doing this. And the other thing too is that everyone thinks that, like, oh, everyone's on the front line with a rifle. About 25% of them will do that, but then like there's tons of people running radios and supply lines, and there's all this other interesting stuff.
there's somebody writing and documenting what's happening.
Yes. It is. Well, there's tons of that.
Yep.
Every unit has a historian.
Yep.
Is like, yeah. So it's this, again, I love my life now. So I get to live at like the intersection of two of the most like ancient institutions in the world.
Sure.
With the church and the military, and then they come together with the chaplain, which chaplain is also an ancient vocation, and it's super rewarding and way more fun than I thought it would be. I had no idea how many helicopters I would get to go on. You know, you can learn to like rappel out of a helicopter in the Army.
Yeah. And it's not required as a chaplain, but should you want to,
Correct.
You can voluntarily do some really cool stuff.
Yes. If you think that stuff's not cool, like most of the time, people aren't going to make you do it. No one's making the chaplains jump out of the airplanes.
But if you want to,
You raise your hand for that one.
Yeah.
But
yeah. No, like I said, as a kid, like, you know, either on parades or something like that, but even going over, you're going to somewhere else with your dad and like, hey, you want to completely off the record, do you want to push this lever on the tank and lower the door? Obviously, it's years ago, and I couldn't get these soldiers in trouble now anyway. But it's, as a kid, dad deployment aside, it was actually pretty all right.
oh yeah.
Yeah.
I have a Humvee. Like,
Yep.
I don't personally own it. You know, the Army owns it, but it's mine. I sign for it.
Yeah.
I'm responsible for it. I sit in the passenger seat, and the chaplain assistant drives. And then you get to like read all the maps and tell them which way to go. But yeah, they don't tell you that in seminary. Like, oh yeah, you could have a Humvee.
Right. Any follow-up questions, Kati?
I was just going to comment on how, like, you can tell how much you like it.
Yeah.
Like, you just love doing what you're doing. So I hope that's a good example for our listeners that are maybe thinking about that route.
Yeah, and so the other thing too is I spent 12 years in the parish before I joined the Army.
Mm-hmm.
I joined the Army when I was 39 years old, which is the age that a lot of soldiers are retiring.
Yep.
If they join at 18 and do 20 years, like, do the math. So it's atypical, but chaplains are older most of the time. Every Army chaplain has to have a bachelor's degree in M.Div and then 2 years of full-time professional ministry experience.
Mm-hmm.
So you're looking at like 10 years if you started from just high school to
Right.
become a chaplain. But the Missouri Synod makes really, really good pastors. And full-time residential education cannot be undervalued. It is top-notch. And a fun thing about being in the chaplaincy is you get to work with people from all sorts of other churches and everything. And I value every single one of them. Well, like, our education is top-notch.
Sure.
And but yeah, so people who want to do this, like, go out and pastor a church. Like, go do that, because it'll make you a way better chaplain. And I think you'll appreciate it more too when you come to the Army, Air Force, or Navy, whatever you want to do.
Right.
There are other branches of service as well. They all have different models of the chaplaincy as well.
Yep.
I had no idea when I signed up. I was like, it's all the same, and it's not.
Nope.
It's fine.
Yeah. Well, different needs into the different branches. Yeah. So
I understand that now, but when I was a pastor, I just knew that everyone in the Army and the Air Force, well, they lived there and they wore like kind of the same uniform, so they probably all had the same job. And now in retrospect, I'm like, no. Actually,
if I were to choose, just based upon not what you were gonna, I'd probably choose the Air Force or the Navy. I would gladly serve in the Army, but my dad was a Marine. And I just remember on the Marine Corps base, again, hoorah, Semper Fi. But whenever we would like go to a different base, whenever we'd go to like the Air Force base, I just, in my mind, like, Dad, why didn't you go to the Air Force? This base, it's just a little nicer than ours.
yes, they
By
do
a little
have.
nice, I mean like way nicer than ours.
They do have nicer things.
They do. Yeah, they for sure. Well, yeah, and my oldest is in love with space, and he talks about being an astronaut, and so yeah, he could be going to the Air Force someday.
We have Army astronauts too.
Do we now?
We do.
Look at that. I mean, you can fly a plane in, again, almost any branch. Like I said, my dad was an air winger, but to be honest, I'm going to probably tell him to go to the Air Force. Anyway, I don't even have a history of Air Force in my family. He can do what he wants when he becomes an adult.
Here's the deal. It's all cool.
It really is. Well, this has been great, and I have tons of more things to follow up on, but unfortunately, I feel like, especially recently, just time has been making a fool of us, where we get caught up in conversations, and we go and we go and we go, but the podcast has to end at some point. But before it does, we have a little segment called "Right for the Picking" or "Leave It on the Tree." Leave it on the tree, where we ask you a bunch of random topics where we just list them off, and if you like it, it's right for the picking. If you don't like it, leave it on the tree. You can explain if you want, or you could just let everybody guess why you do or don't like a thing.
Okay.
It's up to you. And I've made a habit of this, in part because it helps me not have to think of so many new topics all the time. But I think it's just one of those questions that everybody needs to know about each other, and just put it all on the line. So first off, right for the picking, leave it on the tree. Pineapple on pizza.
Oh, ripe for the picking.
You lit up. Yeah. Okay. All right. I knew that's okay. All right. I was wondering. Well,
Perfect. It doesn't get any better.
It does get
Oh.
better. Okay.
The savory and the sweet together. I mean,
See?
All right.
I have to defend this position a lot.
There you go.
Okay.
Listen, and everybody knows how I feel about it if they're a regular listener. If this is your first time listening because you're a friend of Kyle's, if you want to know what actually is the answer to that, just listen to a previous episode.
Listen to several previous episodes.
Yeah. Katie's a flip-flopper, but she only flip-flop because I'm so adamant that
Obstinance.
it doesn't go there. But anyway.
My list is getting smaller and smaller, but this one, actually, I have a pretty strong opinion on this one. So, ripe for the picking or leave it on the tree. Potato wedges.
Leave it on the tree.
Okay.
Potato wedges, like, okay, I'm going to say ripe for the picking. But, like, if it is, like, a soggy potato wedge, and
They
it's
all
just,
are.
like, they don't have to be, though. And there's a way to do it. So, say, like, different ways of, like, cooking the potato first one time, drying it off, but not cooking it through, dry it off, then season it, maybe a little flour on the outside, cornstarch, and then you deep fry it.
Oh.
Exactly.
Okay.
Now I've piqued your interest.
Yeah, because I was gonna say leave it on the tree.
Because then it's like a mashed potato on the inside, but it's got that crunchy texture on the outside. And if you season it well, it's not just a bland potato. I mean, you can make a mashed potato that has a perfect texture, but if it's not seasoned, it's just kind of a soupy potato. Potato is one of those things where like it needs salt.
Yeah.
But I love potato wedges. I like most potatoes. I'm not gonna lie. I'm a potato guy.
I love potatoes, but I think the wedge is my least favorite form of potato.
Because if you don't do it the way I just described it, it's dense.
Yeah.
The potato part is dense.
They're usually just not good.
Yeah.
So,
You just need somebody who loves the kitchen to make the right one. I'm
yeah.
one of those
We just
guys.
don't even try in my house. I gave up on the potato wedge.
Fair enough. All right. There you go.
I feel like I only get them by mistake.
I did not order this.
That's fair. Okay. All right. Well, yeah. All right. But you said you had a strong opinion on it. But I think, like pineapple on pizza,
I mean,
at least
if they're cooked better, sure. But for the most part, they're just not.
yeah. Like when you asked that question, I knew exactly why you wouldn't like a potato wedge and why most people wouldn't. All right.
I don't hate it.
But I get it though. All right. Well, a lot of these are always food. I try to find 2 non-food ones, but this one just.
I like the food. It's all good.
All right. Right for the picking. Leave it on the tree. Kale smoothies.
I like to throw kale in smoothies. Yes, I will pick that. That's right for the picking.
Okay.
It's leave it on the tree because spinach is better in a smoothie.
Interesting.
Yeah, not a kale fan at all.
They're both leave it on the tree for me. I like fruit smoothies, but the moment you put in a vegetable in it, it's like what are we trying to prove here?
They are
It's so gross. And kale, I like kale. Dorothy makes this. Well, she started making this really nice kale and potato and chicken soup, and then I elevated it because that's what I do. No, I mean Dorothy, if she were here, it's just yeah. But raw kale is like
vile.
So is raw spinach, by the way. It's just
like
eating.
raw
It's like
spinach.
just eating grass. I'm not a rabbit.
I feel like there's always like one spinach leaf that has gone bad.
It's
And
slimy, and you have to
Yeah,
find it.
see?
So not even my dogs will eat spinach, honestly, unless there's. Sometimes I'll put like ranch on it, then they'll eat it. Which,
Okay.
yeah, you can't just eat plain spinach, but if you put some stuff on it or put it in, it's great.
You give your dogs spinach with ranch dressing on it?
I have before, yes, to see if it was just like they think the spinach is so vile, or if they're like us, they're like, no, I'm gonna need some dressing, and that's what it was.
Wow.
Yeah, they would eat it then, but not the plain spinach.
A kale smoothie is like pineapple on pizza to me. What are we doing here? Anyway, as you were talking about it, I think that is the exact connection I've made in my mind. It's just fruit. Fruit is fine by itself. No need for something green. I'll eat those later.
Okay, I gotta get one that isn't food. Okay, ripe for the picking or leave it on the tree. That 70s show.
It's been a good 20 years since I've seen it, but I would say that it's ripe for the picking. It occupies a good place in my mind. Huh. And it's a Wisconsin thing too, so we have to like it.
That's fair. It's right for the picking for me. There's like that 90s show I watched like 5 minutes. I was like,
Not great.
No, I'm not gonna do it. It's hard to remake things, but that 70s show, yeah, that's right for the picking for me. That's
me too.
It's good stuff. It's hard to have a sitcom that long, but to develop characters and just keep plots interesting without becoming repetitive.
And all of those people have like gone on to have,
except for Danny Masterson.
yeah.
But yes, everybody else, yes.
But you know them all as the character from that 70s show.
Oh,
Yep.
100%.
I don't know Fez's real name.
Oh, Wilmer Valderrama.
Okay, yeah. I don't
Well, anyway,
know any of the
impressive.
other ones.
Okay, moving on.
Right for the pick and leave it on the tree. Wilmer Valderrama.
Well, Fez.
What else has he been in, though?
Goofy little stuff.
He was in a cop show or something, wasn't he? I think.
I don't know.
This shows how much I know.
don't know. He had this show on MTV called Your Mama, and it was like and I tried to say it like he said it. I would be like, oh, like your mom. I don't know who says like your mama.
Both
but anyway,
are bad.
both are bad. But I'm just anyway. The point being, like, it was like a show where it's like people went back and forth, like, and doing like your mom jokes. It was like a competition. It's very childish, and I did obviously watch a few episodes.
Yeah,
but now, yeah, YouTube
that.
like the show. Wilmer Valderrama, your mama. Anyway. Me and my best friend, there was like one guy who would say a joke, and at the end he'd be like, "Am I right?" After every time he said a joke, and his jokes would be lame, but like the "Am I right?" at the end was hilarious, and we do that all the time to each other. We'll say something like, "Am I right?" Anyway, sorry.
This is really gone off the rails in the best way.
Oh, I appreciate that. This is what happens when I get home late from a conference and record the podcast. All right, last one for me. Right for the picking or leave it on the tree. Conversations with your Uber or taxi driver.
I hate this, but leave it on the tree.
Interesting. All right, I wondered. All right.
I'm a super extrovert.
Yeah.
I
can
don't
tell.
know. Something I would just.
Even that, you're just like, no.
Yeah. Sorry, I took a Uber Comfort the other day because it was actually like cheaper than the normal one for some reason, but it asks you at the bottom like whether you want to have a conversation or not, and I was like, yeah, I guess. I mean, I'm not gonna write no, like.
That's why it's there though.
But then like the lady like tried to talk to me and had like prompts, and I was like, oh, this isn't working. It's like, so you've seen the eclipse?
How's the weather outside?
It's there.
Great.
Oh gosh, yeah, no.
Yeah.
Leave that.
Yeah, me too. It's usually just kind of weird. We don't have to talk. You don't have to talk to me. Don't force it.
I appreciate you. I love you. 5 stars. Whatever tip it tells me to give you.
Yep.
I'm the same. Just leave it on the tree for me, because again, it extrovert. I people ask me like, what do I love most about being a pastor? Even with all of their issues, I genuinely love people. I know we're broken and sinful, but I love people. But especially like getting home from a work trip where almost exclusively I've only been talking to people, and it's late and I just want to get home, see my wife and my kids and go to bed. I just for these 20 minutes, I just want to safely get from the airport to my house and like decompress. And I remember one time I got home and like the Uber driver wouldn't unlock his back door. And he's like, "No, sit up front." I'm like no. I don't think you can force me to do that. But again, I didn't want to cancel and order a new one. Not because I'm afraid to be rude. I have no problem canceling an Uber on somebody. But so I got him in front, and he wanted to have a conversation. I'm like, bro, I have my headphones on still in your car. Like, obviously, I don't want to talk to you. But it's like being forced into something. But it's a hard leave it on the tree for me. I wish.
Have you ever been an Uber driver?
No.
Have you?
Yes.
Oh.
Yeah. I wanted to talk to him. I did one.
Okay.
And then I was like, too much work.
See?
The guy did not want to talk to me, and I was like, why don't you want to talk to me? It was like a weird trip, too, and I was like, what's the deal with this destination?
Right.
And then...
And see, usually what happens, because I'm blessed, we live on campus, we'll get like to campus and then be like, I've been driving Uber for 10 years. I've never been over here. And then they want to have like a conversation at the last minute. It's like, unlock your door, please. You're at my house. Right now, I feel like a prison. No, it's not that bad, but yeah. So if they did want to talk, they can get a quick little 30-minute, this is what this is. This is who I am. Not that I'm afraid to tell people I'm a pastor, but then, that also can lead into a lot of different conversations. Sometimes good, sometimes
tell them
bad.
you should just put on the podcast when you're in an Uber.
I would never in a million years do that. I don't listen to the podcast. I think I've said this on the podcast before. It's so weird. And whenever Dorothy's listening to it when I get home on vacation, I'm like,
What are you doing?
Turn that off.
She's watching it for me.
What would be worse if she was like, she'll listen to, if she was watching it. I'm like, it's so weird. I've like early on when we first started, I would listen to them because I was like, before Dale, I was a producer and I had to do post production edits, and that was the worst. But like the first time, just to hear like, is this good? And then when we were first starting, I listened to Ben, like, listen, bro, we're not that good yet, but let's keep doing it. Whenever somebody asks me about the podcast, I'm like, just go to when we started on YouTube. Don't.
Every podcast, like in its infancy, is like, it sounds awful and people are weird. And yeah.
Well, you think it's like, oh, we could do a podcast. We can just sit down and start talking to people. Even for extroverts, it's not the most difficult thing I do as director of recruitment. but it is a thing, and it is a skill. Just like preaching, even if you were great in speech class, preaching a sermon is very different. All right, enough wasting time for me. Kati, any final thoughts?
No.
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 Sooner than later. I tell Kati, it's been a true joy for her to be the host. And one day I'm just gonna make her run the podcast, and she doesn't just sit there, but I'm gonna.
Well, it's really hard because I have a small background in journalism.
Yeah.
And I would interview people, but it would be written. So I'd interview them, record it, and then it would be in a written story, not this. So for me to pause for 5 minutes to come up with a question was a lot more appropriate. But Dale can edit anything, so if I'm silent and staring for 5 minutes, it's not a big deal.
Sure. Well, Kyle, thank you for being a guest. But before we officially sign off, if there were a listener out there who was on the fence or infant stages or maybe on the late stages of trying to discern whether or not to be a church worker, what would one piece of advice that you would have for them?
Again, if you can do something else, do that. Like, you will have to have internal motivation that comes only from the Holy Spirit to do this job. It's a wonderful life. It's a beautiful life. I don't regret anything. And again, the Lord has given to me so much more than I had expected. But we need people doing other things too. And if you want to do that, then go do that. This is not more holy or blessed than the chemist or whatever it is. The Lord works through all of us, and if you can't deny this, though, then put everything into it and come aboard. And for all those people too who are out there doing other jobs, and they're like, I just feel this pull, do it. Just pull the ripcord and do it. You won't regret it one bit.
Awesome. Well, Kyle, once again, thank you so much for joining us, especially while you're here in St. Louis doing something else, but taking time out of your day to sit down and chit-chat with us, especially for our audience, for them to be able to, hear the life of an active duty LCMS chaplain in the United States Army.
It's fun.
You could jump out of a plane and be a pastor at the same time. Thank you all for joining us, as always, and whether you're listening on the podcast or watching this on YouTube. If you yourself or you got that internal pull, and as you think about a career, you can't think about hardly anything else except for being a church worker, don't think. Fill out a request for information so we know who you are and so that we can contact you. The conversation is free. But we'd love to at least walk with you alongside your discernment process, whether or not you do become a church worker, because we're the church. God designed it this way so we didn't have to do it alone. And if you yourself, that there are other things for you and you're not going to be a church worker, but you've always looked at somebody and thought, man, they'd be a good pastor, teacher, deaconess, DCE, or the like, make sure you tell them, because you could be that person in their life that gives them that encouragement to move forward in the process, and perhaps they could be your pastor someday or your deaconess. Once again, as always, thank you for listening, and we will see you next time under the fig tree. Take care.